Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Casey, and I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services at Tufts. It is a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk about LinkedIn as a tool and a resource. It's an incredible thing to have access to, and I think there's a lot of amazing functionality and best practices that will help us and you build your brand, source opportunities, and make connections to best support your professional and personal aspirations. I think what's imperative to understand, and probably the most important slide talking about today, is that career planning is a process. I think for a lot of us who have sought career support or have worked with a career center historically, many of that can be transactional, the resumes and cover letters, perhaps interview prep. But I think it's understanding that everybody falls along a spectrum. You may know exactly what you want, and you may be trying to build your documents to target those roles. You may not know what you want, and you may want to think about who you are and how that connects to the world around you. We support all of these things in this process. What's interesting about LinkedIn is that, in this sort of 10-step model, about 8 of them are covered around LinkedIn, and that's pretty impressive, actually. Because what we trying to understand, it's a vehicle for a number of different things and tools for us to manage. So we'll be talking about most of these today. So why LinkedIn matters for us from a numbers perspective. LinkedIn is a massive, massive resource. There are about 670 plus million users worldwide, and about 180 million of them are in the US. There are about 20 million jobs and internships. So it is an incredible resource for finding roles. There are about 100,000 Tufts alumni, 100,000 plus actually, Tufts alumni worldwide, and about little over 70,000 of them are on LinkedIn right now. So it's a great place to connect with the Tufts community. It's a huge resource for students and recent college graduates. And one thing is, mentioning here is about 94% of recruiters use it to find or vet candidates. That's a number that I see. I think it's probably higher than that. I would say probably close to 100% of recruiters and hiring managers are using LinkedIn to either find, evaluate, or source and hire candidates. So what's amazing about this is how much power this tool has for something that's predominantly free. So LinkedIn has become the social currency tool of the professional world. So this dialogue as to how to maximize those pieces. So let's talk about profile creation. And as a plan today, one thing is talking about some best practices about your profile. We'll definitely be talking about networking strategy and how to find possible pieces, and then talk about some other functionality that you may find useful moving forward. So I think for many of you already, if not all of you on this call, already have a profile. For those of you who are just getting started, when you see your own personal profile page, this is typically what comes up first. Now, what I think is incredible is that LinkedIn is different than your resume and your cover letter. LinkedIn, one of its best attributes is that is a branding tool. Is that it's not only a content-driven resource, but it's also a visual one. And it's one that is more dynamic. So when your resume or your CV is reflecting a moment of time, so what you've done up to this point, and that can be skills and interests and values and styles and things that you've done, volunteer work you've done, expertise you've developed. What you can do in your LinkedIn profile is showcase it in a more individualized, maybe first-person way. So one of the things that's really critical when you're building your profile is knowing, what you have access to. So right on your first page, these are all the buttons that you can add to. So you're not just limited to just the work experience that you have. You're not just limited to the education that you have. Plenty of fundamentals around who you are. In fact, one of the most important sections on your LinkedIn profile is your About section. We'll talk about that briefly. One, because it lets the reader understand more about you, but two, the very nature of having a summary About section in your page allows you to be able to open yourself up to new opportunities for recruiters. Now, before we get into sort of the mechanisms, I think one of the most critical things to be able to think about is customizing your URL. So this is your personal link on LinkedIn. Typically, when you establish a profile, you'll get a string of letters and numbers. So there's no unique identifier to your URL. I think it's important to set that up right away, because what happens is that because LinkedIn is such a massive tool and it's so ubiquitous professionally, the ability to customize a link allows you to be found easier. So when you're thinking about a recruiter or a hiring manager looking for you, and they're looking for somebody with your background, if they know who you are and they have your resume, they read it and they like you, they'll read your cover letter. If they still like you, want to pursue your candidacy or try and discover you, they're going to go to your LinkedIn profile. And after that, they're going to go to they're going to do a Google search or a search engine search for you. And they'll do it in about 5 minutes. So what you want to be able to do is make sure it's easier and faster for them to access you. So on the previous page in the upper right-hand corner, there's an edit public profile and URL section. So it's right on your first page. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can customize it to anything you want. Our recommendation is to customize your link to your name. It is possible, if not likely, that your name has been used by another person. One way to think about it is use your first name, your middle initial, and your last name. The more you use LinkedIn, the more you promote information or like content or engage with folks, the more your profile is going to be integrated with search engines. And what's going to happen is that the more you use it, the more that personalized link is going to find its way into higher rankings in your search engines. From a recruiter and hiring manager perspective, what we hope to have is that we find one positive link about you on the first 3 pages of a search engine search, like a Google search or Bing or a Yahoo search. Ideally, we can find you a one positive link on the first page of LinkedIn. So this is an easy, passive way to help you through that process. The other thing here is that, as you're developing your profile, you don't have to have your profile live when you are adding content to it. So as you see under edit visibility, you have the ability to update and anything you want ahead of time. And when you're ready to show the world, you can set your profile being visible. And then you can customize it to whatever audiences you're looking for. So if you want it to exclusively to your first degree contacts or to a broader network, you're able to do that. So the second thing is setting up basic information. Your LinkedIn profile, particularly at the top, is an advertisement. The first thing that typically see in your LinkedIn profile is usually a little blue box with a string of sort of circles and lines in it. That's a place where you can customize a background banner. There's no standard for setting up a background banner. It can be related to the work you do, the city that you live in, or it could just be something personal that connects to you. Because it's aside from your picture, it's the first piece of content they're going to see, I do recommend adding pictures. As you're developing your background, certainly talking with career services or our colleagues and friends or looking at best practices of other people that have profiles you like is a way to do that. The second thing is having your LinkedIn photograph. It does not have to be a conservative, buttoned up, hyper-professional photograph. What's really great about technology now is even some of the existing cameras and with profile settings allow to take a great photograph. Something that photographs you well in the pieces. You can have a varied background in the pieces, but it doesn't have to be a shirt and tie. But something that certainly reflects you and looks like you currently. So you have 2 images before you ever get to any content about who you are. So people are going to start, connecting you with a brand. But the next thing under that is developing a custom headline. Many of you may have it set up where it says student at Tufts University. So underneath your name, which is underneath your picture, is a place to put a variety of characters to describe who you are. This is a huge opportunity to tell the world more about you. You can have your existing job, but the challenge with something like this is that people won't necessarily know exactly what value you're creating or why you should be interesting and why they should read more. So think of your photograph and your background as the image of the advertisement, and think of this section as your tagline. So there are a variety of examples and ways to do it. There is no set standard. Sometimes it can be a list of keywords, separated by down slashes. Sometimes it can be a descriptor of value that you've created, but something that's meaningful and resonating with an audience. So if you're looking for a data science role, or analytics, or marketing, or strategy, is having some of the vocabulary words in that, is having strategic marketing, or analytics, or AI and machine learning, or business intelligence. Sometimes putting your degree credentials in that profile. So it creates a quick idea of your experience and background. And these can evolve over time. It's just, please don't waste the premium space when you're working in these areas. And these are just examples that you can use on this particular page. Again, with the career services or people we work with, we can help you sort of develop that messaging as you're thinking about your targets. And that's what's critical, is that this is a message that's going to resonate with the audiences that you want to connect with. It doesn't mean you have to know exactly what you're looking for, but it gives them an idea of the value or why you should be interesting and why they should connect to you. So you have a header section, and then you have your summary area. Absolutely critical. And this is what's different than a resume and a CV and a cover letter, where your resume may have an executive summary, which is sharing some fact-based information, perhaps about your skills or your experience. Your cover letter is a document connecting to a particular job that tells that audience why you, why that job, and why right now. Your LinkedIn summary is a broader, more specific, and oftentimes more personal showcase about your brand and about who you are. So it is also not limited to your degree experience. It's not limited to your professional experience. This is something to connect with an audience about who you are. It's often written in first person, so using I statements is fine. There are times when you'll see, a lot of times business owners or entrepreneurs will put in the third person, so like as if somebody wrote their summary on behalf of them. Either is fine. The first person seems to be more typical and more readily accessible. Certainly not thinking about, don't forget your pertinent information like your degree in Tufts, because that's where you are. It is a professional document, but it doesn't have to be static. It can be narrative. Many of you for graduate school had to write a statement of personal interest or personal connection or a reason why you were interested in Tufts. Sometimes those documents are great catalysts for developing a summary because there's a connection, a personal element that relates well to you and why you're studying what you're studying. The other thing with the summary that can be helpful, certainly at the end, is listing keywords. So as you're looking and targeting particular roles or jobs, there's going to be specific vocabulary that goes into some of those roles. So I think it's helpful. You can list multiple keywords, because what ends up happening is that the more times certain words that are related to what you're looking for are featured in a certain profile, the more likely a recruiter or hiring manager is going to find you in their search credentials for particular roles. So passively searching for candidates like yourself, having keywords set up, we can certainly help you with developing that list as well. Again, there's no one specific summary example. Here's one. So it's pretty direct. There's some basic elements to it, some pieces, but it gives the audience a little bit of understanding about who this person is. This presentation for everyone who registered will be submitted, so any of the examples that are included, we'll be able to share with you and you'll be able to adapt. One of the things that become frustrating is, how do I start this process? And what we have done is we've created something that might be helpful to you. So it's a brand statement. So think of this first slide as a fill in the blank, where it's a skeleton of a little bit about who somebody is. So within each of these open-ended boxes, you could consider filling in elements of who you are. So what your name is, what your degree program, breaking down skills and competencies and industries and attributes. So it's not just exclusively about what you can do or what you have done, but a little bit about who you are and what and why you're unique. So here's one example that could be a starting process. So a little bit about a degree, a little bit about timing of graduation, a little bit about background, a little bit of knowledge about industries of experience or exposure, then a little bit more skills and expertise, but then also adding some attributes. So, looking for an organization that's innovative, socially conscious, and fun. So you're giving the audience a little bit more information about what you value and what is interesting to you and how you can connect to them. So what LinkedIn allows you to do is create a little bit more personality to your brand. So there are a variety of elements to what your profile looks like. We've gone through picture and headline summary. We're not going to go through all of these pieces on your LinkedIn profile because they're exhaustive, but I will say some best practices, most certainly, adding your education. With adding your experience, your professional experience, one thing that I think can be helpful is certainly descriptors, and a little bit of information about that role is helpful. One thing that I think can be very valuable is a 1 or 2 sentence description of the organization that you worked for. And this is often true in resumes and CVs. Most of us will or have worked at organizations that most other people haven't heard about. And that's just common. Not everybody is working with a globally known brand like Google or Microsoft, et cetera. So 1 or 2 sentences about who that organization is becomes very helpful to contextualize your work. Now, the size of the organization doesn't matter. If it is large, if it's Google is a 300,000 employee organization, but if you worked for a small startup, explaining it as a boutique is completely fine. Just what people want to understand is a general context about that role itself. Now, additional aspects, things like volunteer experience can be incredibly important. There's a skills section in LinkedIn, which is helpful. LinkedIn allows you to add 50 unique skills to the skills profile. That's a great way to set up specific keywords for the skills that you have. The one thing that's really nice about skills is that other people connected to your profile who know who you are can validate your skills. So they may see on their profile your name, and do you recommend this person for business development or communications or strategy? You can click on them. So you can have external connections validate your skill profile. This is not imperative. It is a nice to have. Hiring managers are unlikely to not solicit your candidacy because you don't have robust validation from your existing network. If you get it and build it over time, that's fine. But I think with this, with LinkedIn, it can be helpful, and you can do the same thing for others. As you can validate somebody else's experience, it might be valuable to them later. So over time, usually the more you're in a field or more you're doing things consistently, the more people are going to start identifying you with certain themes. And over time, those lists of skill validations will increase. But you can add languages, certifications, projects, honors, and awards. Publications. So for those of you who have written or been published anywhere, being able to add those pieces. You can add coursework. I think there are times when coursework can be appropriate, particularly if it's definitely relevant to the work. I don't think if you're building your LinkedIn profile, having an exhaustive list of all your graduate education, undergraduate programming, I think it might be a little bit of a distraction, but if there are some that are directly relevant, that can be helpful as well. So there are plenty of resources and tools online. LinkedIn has a great education feature about how to use its own services. YouTube is a great way to look at professional profile development in specific categories, but understanding that it's a robust place to put a lot of different information in a lot of different areas. One other thing that people will ask about is, do I need recommendations? When LinkedIn was first launched, it was a much more important aspect. In fact, there were a lot of recruiters initially, because of how valuable the tool was, that if you did not have one external recommendation about you in LinkedIn, they wouldn't consider your candidacy. I don't believe that's true anymore. I do think it's important at the minimum is to have at least one recommendation just to make sure that box is filled. And I would recommend at least giving one recommendation to somebody else. So that's completed. But it doesn't have to be a huge thing, and you don't necessarily have to usually have to ask somebody, if you offering the piece, they'll decide if they want to promote it on their own page, but you can submit a recommendation for somebody else anytime you'd like. So incredibly helpful tool with incredibly helpful pieces. Certainly at the end of this workshop, we'll be open for plenty of time for questions on specific details should you have any. So the profile is a big deal. How do we use it? So with nearly 700 million people and 20 million jobs and 100,000 plus Tufts alumni, it's an incredibly easy way to access communities and to build relationships and to learn about roles, learn about opportunities, learn about connections, to build communities, to manage a job search, to find colleagues and contemporaries and mentors, and to solicit referrals for opportunities. So there's a lot of moving pieces that can work very helpful for individuals. Let's talk about the power of networking and networks. So this is a graphical image happens to be my LinkedIn network about 7 or 8 years ago. So this represents about 1,000 people, and each dot represents 1,000 people. And then you'll see by the color schematic, it's broken down by a variety of communities. But what allows people to do is sort of see some intersections and overlaps between the relationships that we have. Unfortunately, this InMaps tool was eliminated by LinkedIn about 5 years ago, so it no longer exists, which is too bad because I think it was very, very helpful. But it is a good way to sort of see how the dots connect. So that little red square box represents about 1,000 first-degree connections. So that's me being directly connected to an individual. If I'm looking for a second-degree connection, so somebody that's connected to somebody else, I would have access to about 500,000 people from second-degree connections. If I was looking for third-degree connections, so in order to get in touch with an individual, there were 2 people that I had. One person was linked to another person, linked to another person, linked to the person I'm looking for. I have access to about 11 million people. So for a predominantly free tool with a network of building, the access is exponential to a community. My network's slightly larger now. So you end up, at this time, this would represent about 250,000 people on LinkedIn. Having 11,000 or so different third-degree connections is giving you access to 3 or 4% of LinkedIn. So this is not to say accepting every LinkedIn request is necessary. What it speaks to is that the more connections that you have, the broader the access you have to ideas and people and opportunities. And the scale is really astounding. So you're able to see your network, and on the top of each of a lot of these pages, you'll see, breakdowns of task bars. So, within your network, so you can, be able to click on this link and to be able to see all the variety of connections you have, but you can also see the people that you follow, the organizations and groups you're connected with, pages that you followed, hashtags that you connect with. So, this place is a location to sort of see volume. The one thing that is a little frustrating with LinkedIn is it doesn't allow us to see the number of third-degree connections that we have, at least from the free version. So you can't necessarily quantify the absolute scale of your reach, but I think we sort of prove the point that it gets bigger with more. So making connections is incredibly helpful, and everybody, I believe, is open and fair game to that opportunity. So adding as many people as possible can be helpful. So a baseline for adding, can you add 30 connections over a week? Sure, but adding your friends and your networks, your family, your professors, people that connect with you, your own existing community, and thinking about how many people just within the Tufts community that you know and have connected to. Now, what's really interesting about that is how often we don't necessarily connect to the personal communities in our lives, and how often those personal connections that we have are often our biggest professional advocates. So thinking about family members and extended family members and friends who you may not have complete overlap with professionally, but would know who you are and would be able to speak to you, maybe from a skills perspective, but maybe just from a values and a styles perspective, if somebody's doing, some background research on who you are. So there's no top limit. Are there times when you wouldn't accept connection requests, submission? Sure. I say that I accept almost all LinkedIn requests, except when organizations tend to be soliciting business. Having also being an entrepreneur and running having historically run a coaching business, is that there are a lot of connection requests, people trying to help me build my business. And that's not the work that I'm looking for. I'm more interested in connecting with individuals. So I tend not to accept those requests, but those are pretty limited. But otherwise, it's helpful. But one thing I do request is if I do get submissions that don't have any context, oftentimes I'll send a message to the individual who sent it to me asking, appreciate your connection request. Is there anything about my profile that was interesting, or is there anything myself or my network can help you with? So then you have an idea of why that person connected with you. Because I think it's really important to understand the network that you built and how you cultivate it. I don't think it's not just important to have the volume. I think it's important to have the pieces, because, for a lot of us, especially in career services, the networks that we've cultivated, when we've met you and worked with you, often a lot of us will open up our networks to the grad students that we work with. So if I know who you are and you're thinking about connecting with somebody in my network, I feel comfortable connecting because I know who that person is. So I think it's true. And companies do this all the time. They just call it customer relationship management. So one big example is Salesforce, which is a tool that allows organizations to track information about people. And sales professionals use this all the time to remember conversations that they've had. So it's not just about having individual information about a person. It also is just important having context about who that person is and what you can do with that tool. And not every relationship you has the same value. But understanding how to manage those relationships can be helpful in the short and very much in the long term. When you're thinking about submitting a connection request to somebody else, as I mentioned, if I don't have context, I usually ask for it. The better case scenario is that when you are asking for a connection request, is that you submit a message along with it that tells you, introduces yourself, adds a little personal note that's related to why you're connecting to them, and thanking for that time. There is a character limit, so it can't be an exhaustive message. But just a simple breakdown with some specificity can be very helpful and will likely increase the option that they'll accept your connection request. So in this particular case, this is where you might put a personal message. There are some profiles, prominent profiles, or ones that have huge followings that require an email access to connect with them. Sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. Just making sure that on occasion, there will be times when there will be emails that are requested to sort of a gateway to get access to folks. But this is what a page might look like if you wanted to add a personal message. And look, there's a 300 character limit. So because you're a Tufts student, you have, there's 100,000 plus Tufts alums, and like I said, more than 70,000 Tufts alumni on LinkedIn, where you have a common connection and thread. So being able to find them and access them to make those connections about exploration and careers and jobs and mentorship is important. So doing a basic search by Tufts University and finding Tufts page, and you can do this for any business or any school, having breakdowns. What it does be able to feature is your alumni. So what I really like about the alumni function, look at this, almost 71,000, is that it allows you to do a customized search by the people that you're looking for. So you can do keyword searches for alumni or anyone by their major, by their topic, by the business they're in, by their job titles, and you'll get a feature. And you can also break it down by the number of years those people were connected with through Tufts. So you can start seeing, looking at market analyst jobs in Boston, who comes up at the top and who's related to Tufts, and then be able to see and access the people that are on that page. This is incredibly useful tool. So you've built networks, you're thinking about the context you want to make. There's a breakdown of the alumni you may want to access, as an example, the communities you want to connect with. Many of you are trying to find and look for jobs and internships. So I mentioned that, I think it's nearly 100% of recruiters and hiring managers that are using the tool to find, evaluate, or hire talent. So making sure that you have yourself set up to access, for people to find you easily and for you to find them as easily as well. One thing that LinkedIn changed in the last year or so is that it allows you to on your personal profile page, underneath your tagline where you're located, is a breakdown of whether or not you are open to work. This is fantastic access. So what it allows you to do is, this box and these pieces is tell the audience that you're connected, or that potential audiences that you want to connect with for jobs or internships or other career opportunities, what you are interested in. So when clicking on that little pencil icon, you can break down existing job titles that you're looking for, locations that you're interested in, when you're available to start, the types of work you're looking for. And you can even break down who can see this. So if you have an existing employer and you perhaps don't want them to know you're open to new opportunities, although I believe everyone should be open to all opportunities at all time because we're thoughtful about managing our careers, you may not want your employer to know that you're open to those opportunities. So you can select whether or not it's just allowing recruiters who are paying for paying for LinkedIn's recruitment tool to find talent, have them have access to your profile. Now, that being said, if there is, that your employer is actually using LinkedIn Recruiter to use that to find you, they, likely would be able to see your profile. So this is about, personal preference and options. But from a career planning standpoint, I think it's always great to be open to other opportunities and be open and to take the conversations. It's always your prerogative to say no to the outreach, but limiting yourself to possibilities, now in the future, may not be the most prudent course. One thing it other adds is that if you add that you're open to opportunities, and when you're immediately open, is that LinkedIn within the last 2 months added an open to work badge. So where your LinkedIn profile image would be, around that would sort of be a green bar with a hashtag open to work. So when people see your profile and visualize your profile, it's saying that you are looking for opportunities. Now, this is in response to unemployment in COVID, and there are different schools of thought of whether this is a thoughtful or useful thing to do with your profile. Some say it's great because it just lets the world know that you're open to new opportunities. Conversely, people are saying it's letting people know that you're out of work, and it's harder to get is it harder to get a job when you're not currently working? We are continuing to evaluate this resource and its utility, given the high level of unemployment and the reality that this pandemic is impacting so many employers. I think there probably is some more positive value in having access so people know immediately that you're on the market for those pieces. But should you have specific questions about this, I would highly recommend setting an appointment with us or talking with another professional to see what your particular situation is and whether or not it makes sense. So you're able to do searches for jobs on LinkedIn. An amazing tool for job search and job search strategy. The one caveat that I'll mention is that if you are looking for jobs and internships, I would not use LinkedIn as your exclusive resource for looking for opportunities. The reason is that you have to pay for a placement of a job in LinkedIn. So if you're an employer, it could be $500 per job per month to post. So it can get potentially very expensive. So organizations that don't necessarily have the bandwidth, the reach, or the investment dollars to put in might not be placement. So there may not be jobs. There may be lots of jobs in other places. We talk, other conversations about search strategy. So just thinking about not using it exclusively. But that being said, because there are so many jobs and opportunities, there's a lot of functionality to looking for opportunities. So you'd be able to search by the title of the job, the location of the organization, but across the header up top is that it's incredibly customizable. So you can evaluate or look for jobs under a variety of filters, which is brilliant. So the industry you're looking for, or the number of applicants to that particular job, or the location, but also things, look in the bottom, things like experience level. So if you happen to be looking for an internship or an entry-level role, you can customize to the specific level of the job you're looking for. And then, sample titles. So I think the customization is huge. So you get a more targeted list of opportunities. And that's critical, because the more targeted you are in the roles that you're looking for that fit your credentials, the easier it is to write your marketing documents when you're promoting your brand or in your LinkedIn profile itself. So within those job sections, you're not limited to just the jobs themselves. You have the ability to look up people related to a market title. So people that have marketing analyst jobs that may be in your network or connected to somebody else in your network, to be able to talk to them about the work that they do, or maybe it's the organization that you want to work for and making connections. So I think it's a really nice way to think about how do people that have similar jobs that you're looking for, how have they created their own profiles, and how might you customize it to emulate the things that they're doing, be able to reach out to individuals about the work that they're doing or the organizations they're connecting with, and a way to be able to filter without just having to look at the market as a whole, but in a very targeted way. So you have incredible amount of customization that you could do on your account. As I mentioned before, you can set up who sees your profile, when they see your profile, how much profile is available, when they communicate you, how much privacy that you have. We're not going to go through all these pieces today, but recognizing the fact is that you get to choose what information is put up, how detailed that information is, when it's put up, and how it's delivered, and who has access to it. So I think having that level of control over a very vital branding tool becomes helpful. So what that's saying is that it's not a one size fits all. Everybody has a different level of comfort with how they want to expose and build their brand in the marketplace. So this is a pretty effective tool to do those things. So, I imagine there's a variety of questions to follow up on this piece, but I will say that, we have a Tufts career guide, and the Tufts career page has a number of resources related to networking and branding and LinkedIn. We're very excited that over the next few weeks, certainly by the first of the semester, we are launching a new website, which will be a new way for you to engage with us and us with you with industry and market and topic and resource specific elements that can help you out. So sort of LinkedIn networking will definitely, resource be featured in those areas. And, for those of you who are thinking about, career planning or working with us, all of our programming, with maybe a few exceptions in the fall, will be virtual. So although we do continue to have a presence in Dowling, and it will be staffed by 1 to 2 people each day, but we won't be necessarily doing any workshops or engagements or coaching sessions there. There are some caveats to that. We are predominantly virtual. So the Tufts Career Center definitely has this information. And my email is at the bottom, matthew.casey@tufts.edu. So questions you want to have, elements you want to consider, to set up appointments to discuss things like LinkedIn, Handshake is your best resource. Myself and my colleagues keep our appointments up to those pieces. And I always say, if you've attended a workshop or an event that we've done and you don't see availability on Handshake for some reason, feel free to send me a week or 2 worth of your availability and how we've connected prior, and I will do my best to find time in our calendars to make sense and to find an opportunity for us to have a conversation. So I would love to be able to address any questions and conversations you have. So I appreciate the time and be able to share some of these best practices with you, and I'd love to hear more from you.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I was just told this past week that a lot of companies start their hiring process in the fall, even if it goes into the next year. So for students who are expecting to, let's say, graduate in May of the following year, is there a set time where you should start applying? Is it too soon? I assume there's a too late, but is there a too soon?
It's a great question. So one way I think about it is that if a company or an organization is promoting an opportunity, let's say on Handshake or a job board, where you have an actual position that has a submission process to it, then I would be thinking about your resume and cover letter for that particular job because it's open. If there aren't opportunities that are currently available or open at that time, or perhaps you know about them or interested or want to learn more, one thing people will create instead of a cover letter is a letter of interest. So you can send, instead of commenting on a specific job, you can send a message or a letter introducing yourself, your background, and your experiences. And should opportunities in these areas present themselves, you're welcome to have a conversation. That is an effective tool to put your brand on somebody else's radar screen. Ideally, being able to send to an individual is helpful. I suppose you can send it more blindly to an HR team, but I think having an individual to connect with that they can share can be helpful. I don't, so I think from too early, because I think that's when the networking starts. So if you know, having conversations about types of roles or how people have applied historically, talking with career services staff to see what the timing has been historically about accessing folks. So I think too early is just, if it doesn't exist, letting people know you exist. If too late, you never actually know. And this, pandemic world is a great example. There are probably a lot of you that had maybe internships or jobs that were postponed or even canceled over this year. There are organizations that are trying to figure out what's next. So you might be in the process, or they might have had something up and it's been up for months. There are organizations that have paused opportunities. So what I'm saying is, you don't necessarily know if something's closed or not. Usually hiring managers are good about closing out potential job profiles on LinkedIn and targeted job boards. Things like Indeed and Monster and Career Builder, where they're more aggregated job boards, you really don't know necessarily if the job's been closed for 2 days or a year. So that's my thinking. The earlier the earlier networking with organizations of interest, with peers and managers to know who you are, makes it easier when you make those submissions. So I'd be building relationships now, and then figuring out learning about what specific hiring windows are, and then submitting those applications when they're clear about what those things, when those dates are set.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. There's a question. Do you have any suggestions for how to manage one LinkedIn presence while managing career searches in multiple industries? Yeah, it's actually a great question. Your summary is a big place for that. So I think it's because you have complete control over the customization of your brand. This is the way to do it. So you can express interest in multiple areas within a summary page. So being able to say, it's my background happens to be in X, Y, and Z, but given this background or training I've developed, I'm also interested in developing these pieces. But whatever you're trying to do for an audience is that you want to, two things need to happen. Jobs are, organizations like credentials, they like degrees, they like expertise. But organizations typically hire, do we think you may be valuable? Do we think we're going to like you? And do we want to pay you for it? So that opens some windows to talking about, more generally about your interests and your background. And what's really important is for you to connect the dots for the reader about what they should know about you. So what you're trying to avoid is that people drawing wide conclusions. So I think you may have multiple targets. If you've got 10, it may be a lot, but you may want to coach and consult and teach and mentor. And those may be 4 distinct roles, but they may have a lot of skill-based or value-based attributes that go along with it. So that's how I would be thinking about it. Certainly, we can help customize those pieces, but if it's, and then for, if it's specific searches you're talking about, one thing that's great about LinkedIn and a lot of job profiles is being able to set up custom job alerts. So let's say you looked up marketing analyst, that's the example that I used. You can just click a button and it will save that search by whatever parameters that you set. So it'll be able to feed you back potential targeted roles in the areas you're looking for, and you're not bound by any areas. You can set I think you can set as many job alerts as you want. So, but at the end of the day, the onus is on the individual to communicate their value and utility and interest to the people in the marketplace. 25 years ago, when technology was in its infancy, when online applications weren't ubiquitous, yeah, somebody might read through your profile and say, oh, this person sounds kind of interesting, even if it wasn't exactly on an interview, because they may get 20 submissions for a job, by mail. Last year, I think Google had 3 million applications, so they get about 100,000 a day. So being unique and distinct and targeted becomes very helpful. So I know everyone has a very customized piece of what that would look like, but I think very connect the dots for folks. Can you give your opinion on ResearchGate versus LinkedIn with regards to academic career opportunities? I have to confess, I don't have a lot of experience with ResearchGate, but it's something that Georgios, we could certainly connect with offline if that's helpful. So one other question people ask is it valuable to consider LinkedIn Premium? And it's a really good question. Is that, should I pay money each month for a tool that has so much functionality that's free? There are a couple benefits to Premium. Anybody who has a LinkedIn profile is usually offered a LinkedIn Premium for free for the first month. I definitely think it's worth trying. There are a couple reasons. One, when you are trying to make a connection to a contact that's not in a first, second, or third degree connection, so you just want to connect to anybody, you have 5 of those for free. When you have LinkedIn Premium, you have 25 individual in-mail emails that you can send to anybody on LinkedIn for any reason. That can be helpful. The other thing is it allows you to see more second degree and third degree connections as you're looking for connecting with other individuals. One really interesting tool is that if you're looking at jobs, it will give you salary details and market benchmarks. So to give you an idea of what other places have hired, what type of ranges and where geographically, that can be helpful when you're thinking about whether or not the job works for you or what's consistent with the market or how you might want to think about negotiating moving forward. So there actually is some pretty significant value in Premium, and I would say that it's a useful tool when you are in the throes of your actual job search and your active applications. And the other thing that I'll mention is when you're setting up your profile and you're open up to work, or just saying you're available to recruiters, by setting that up to a yes, when the recruiters and hiring managers are using LinkedIn Recruiter to find talent, they may do a search for people with certain credentials for a specific role. By setting up, and that, let's say they were looking for a market analyst, and that based on the parameters they're looking for, 1,000 people came up. By setting up in your profile that you're open to opportunities, you go to the top of the pile. So there may be 1,000 people that fit the description, but 80 of them put on their profile that they're open. And when the hiring manager or the recruiter sees their candidate page, they're going to see 1,000 people are available, but they'll see the top 80 that are saying they're open to it. And just by a matter of typically convenience, we'll start reaching out to the people that are open first. So just the very nature of switching that on makes you more easily discoverable and potentially giving you a better opportunity for a conversation with a hiring manager. So I'd be strongly considering connecting with your classmates, connecting with faculty, connecting with administrators, connecting with friends, reaching out to individuals, having conversations. It really is a revolutionary tool for relationship management and job search strategy. And we'd be happy to help you out with any part of your profile or managing your networks, should you find that valuable. Perfect. Well, if there aren't any more questions, again, it's matthew.casey@tufts.edu. And again, for appointments, you can be able to find us on Handshake. And specific questions about LinkedIn or any of those elements on the career planning process that I showed earlier, or really any questions you have about career and career management. Some of you may be, existing working jobs. We do a lot of executive coaching too. So how do you manage your boss? How do you manage up? How do you think about your career in the next, day? And when the one great benefit at Tufts, amongst many, is that we offer career services for life for our alumni. So once you graduate from the program, you have access to Tufts and many of its resources, and dedicated career practitioners to help you with your, with the next phase of your career and your job search. So this is great. I appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a great rest of the summer.